Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining another Stender webinar. I'm Joe. I'm an admissions counselor with Stender School. This is a fun one. The previous webinars we've done have been kind of focused on our business and tech programs, but this one's neat. It's focused on more of our education programs. We have Dr. Chery Lucarelli presenting on design thinking. This is a topic that ties into our Masters of Education program as well as our Doctorate of Education program. So I encourage you to check these out. They're applicable to different careers and pathways. So if you think this is something you want to check out a little bit deeper, I'll send you a link. We're also going to record this, and we'll have some of the materials to send to you later this week or next week. So I'll put the link in there. Check out the programs. Also spread the word. If you think it could be a good fit for someone else, let them know. So I'll put it in here. I'll put my info and I will pass it to Chery.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe. I'm really excited to get started, and I'm so excited to see you here today. I absolutely love this topic. And so it's really exciting to be here to talk to a group of people about it. This is totally optional, but we'd love to know your story. If you feel open, you could share where you're at, who you are, maybe, or even what inspired you to join us today. Totally optional. I know a lot of you might be on a phone, or maybe you're eating lunch right now and this is hard, but feel free to go ahead and share that. Here's our agenda for today. Ultimately, my goal is to give you a very top level of design thinking. What are the benefits? Walk through some of the phases of design thinking and give you some examples, and maybe inspire you to come away with an action. And then we'll end with some question and answers. So that's really a top level overview of what we're going to do today together. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about my background as it's relevant to today's session. So I'm currently as Joe said, I chair our Doctorate of Educational Leadership program. But not that long ago, I was able to get a grant from Google with a colleague, Jen Rosato, to try to expand computer science education. And because of that incredible opportunity, I got to visit Google. And at that session, I had a training session on design thinking with somebody from Stanford's Design Institute School, sometimes called the D School. And I'd never heard of design thinking before, and it was incredibly inspirational for me because it gave me strategies and language around all the things I believe about working inclusively with groups of people to improve a problem of practice. Since then, I've gotten some additional certifications and most recently participated in a global community of other design thinkers, which has been incredibly inspirational. Design thinking is used in a whole variety of contexts: healthcare, businesses, nonprofits, cities, all kinds of places where people are looking for better ways to address complex problems. It's an ongoing research interest of mine. And I will say I finally have called myself a designer, but I am still learning. I am learning all the time about how to try to do this better. Just some agreements I'd like to share with the group. I think it's important to be patient with each other, realize we all have good intent. And that's something I'd like to share throughout this presentation today, that even folks who have designed something in the past most likely had really good intent. And for some reason it stopped working. And we're all in different places. We have different lived experiences. And those experiences bring a different perspective that's really important to this work. And ultimately, let's just be kind with each other and show respect. So I have a little poll. I'd like to know, what is your experience with design thinking? So I'm going to throw this poll up. And this is obviously optional. If you're able to answer it, that'd be great. Otherwise, you can see other responses. So we'll launch the poll. So if you're having trouble seeing the poll because you're on a phone or something else, you could think about you've never heard of it before, or you've heard of it, but you've never used it, or I've used it in a personal project, or I've been part of a team, or have facilitated design thinking. So let's kind of see where we end up here. Just give a few more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and we'll take a peek at the results. And I'm going to ask my wonderful colleague, Dr. Amy Merzen, who's helping with the chat. Are you able to see the poll? The results?
I am.
Thank you. So if you can see the results, most of us, we're fairly new to design thinking, although we have somebody who's been a facilitator. It's wonderful. Okay. So
Yes,
most of
we
us
have.
are, yeah,
Yes.
so most of us are fairly new. Okay. I'll stop sharing those. Gonna move. Okay. So I'd just like to take a minute and remind us that everything around us is actually designed. And because of that, it can be reimagined and it can be redesigned. And we all design. We may not think of ourselves as designers, but in fact, when we create anything, or even I've got this happening in my life right now. My parents are facing a 60th wedding anniversary. That didn't sound very nice. We're going to celebrate a 60th wedding anniversary party for them. And we actually have to design that. But we're also designing all the time. If we're educators, we're designing classes. If we work in healthcare, we might be designing something for patients. If we own a business, we might be designing something in that space, a service. So we do all design. We just may not think of ourselves in this way. So for the purposes of today, I'd like you to envision that just regular folks as designers, also acknowledging that some people have great expertise in different kinds of design. So here's something that was designed. Somebody thought, gosh, what if I own more than one cat? You can see the little cat ears. That's really cute and quaint. And they thought, I'm going to design this lovely way in which I can feed more than one cat at a time. So this was thoughtful design, I'm sure, but in reality, this was the use of the design. So you might have experienced this yourself, where you thought you designed something lovely and the way it was used is not how you had intended. And that happens all the time. And I guess I'd like you to think about for today, maybe hold space for something in your mind. What is something you would like to redesign? What is something you notice that is designed not as good as it could be? You don't need to share this, just hold it in your mind. And who would it be for? Would it be children in your life? Perhaps some elders, patients, bicyclists? I'm a bicyclist, so this is something I'm a user of, and I see opportunity for a redesign. Also, I like to travel, and I have lots of ideas about how maybe I could redesign airplane travel. So it could be a little bit better for the user. So just hold that in mind. And let's talk about what is design thinking as you're holding that in your mind. First of all, design thinking is human-centric. And just want to give a brief background. I have an hour with you today. This in and of itself could be an extensive about what is the background of design thinking. So historically, this design thinking, designerly ways of knowing, cognitive design goes way back to the 50s and 60s. In the 80s, it was, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little application message here. In the 80s, it was used for business management. And in the 2000s, the Institute of Design at Stanford adopted this 5-step process that is the focus of today's session, and often people understand and recognize. So I'll be talking about that. It's also adopting a designerly ways of knowing, thinking, and acting, and most useful when we're thinking about complex or wicked problems, but also useful even elements of design work could help us with even smaller problems. So again, there are 5 phases about design thinking: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And this might be an image that you might have seen before or are somewhat familiar with, these phases here. This gives a little more explanation on the phases. So empathize is where we're really working hard to develop and do deep listening and understanding what are the challenges of our users. sometimes called stakeholders. Then often we want to think about how we can take those insights and research from that empathy phase and really define the problem we're trying to solve. Then moving to where we are able to ideate, brainstorming potential solutions, trying to find the best solution, creating prototypes, and then testing. And this process is not, although it looks linear and you do have to start somewhere, it actually is often overlapping. And that's a misconception I'd like to speak about later. That's something that, for example, I myself did not understand early in my own training, that often these phases go hand in hand, they're back and forth. Sometimes you're doing them in a parallel fashion. The principles of design are action-oriented. So it obviously involves collaboration, community, and discussion, but it's focused on taking action, moving towards a better solution. It's people first, user-centered, with the whole idea is that if we can collaborate and include a set of collaborators in our space, we can optimize creativity. We can really look for the very best problems. We can prototype and experiment, and we can do this in a number of ways. So I'm going to again go a little bit deeper on each phase. So empathize, it's really critical to understanding the problem. It focuses on, we might call this research. We might, for example, want to observe and engage with the people we're designing for. So I'm a former elementary school teacher, and I can tell you that often a very difficult problem we encountered was the lunchroom. I don't know why, but that always seemed to be quite a problem. And it might have been helpful when I was doing that work if myself and perhaps some others sat and really observed what was happening. Perhaps we could observe the way the way the children were flowing into the space, and why some children rarely had time to get their lunch and others had more than enough time. It allows us to gather insights and information, and sometimes we can do something called an empathy map, and I'll explain what that is, where we can better understand the thoughts and feelings behind the experiences that our users are facing. We take that information and we really try to define what's happening. We look for patterns, we look for trends. At this phase, we're really trying to understand the problem, the right problem, so we can garner possible solutions. We might create a problem statement that's very user-centered so that we can address possible solutions. Then we begin to ideate, sometimes called brainstorming. I know brainstorming for some people, I'm aware, based on a lot of the work I've done with people like recently, that the idea of the word brainstorming sometimes is problematic. Some people have not had good experiences and have found it not helpful for a variety of reasons. But I think with the right strategy, ideating, brainstorming really is essential. And with the right techniques can really help you get to a better solution. And some ways to do that would be individual mind mapping tools, seeing how quickly you and the team can come up with 100 ideas, try to really expand our thinking and push our boundaries, and knowing that you're going to have to go back and let go of some of those ideas. Finally, moving into prototyping. What's a small scaled down version of a model or a service? And in our case, as we used design thinking for our Doctorate of Educational Leadership program. We've started by creating small instructional components rather than creating the whole class. And we got feedback early on so that we could better have our users in mind. So what it does is it really allows you to test some ideas before you've invested time, energy, and money into something that maybe isn't the best solution. And again, prototype and test often go hand in hand. You're prototyping, you're testing, you're trying to get feedback early and often, trying to move towards a better solution. So again, these are the steps we just covered, and I called them steps, and I purposefully was trying to stop myself from using steps. It's really our phases. Again, you can understand where you might know a little bit about a user. You feel you have a better idea about what the problem is. You begin to ideate. Maybe you prototype and you say, whoa, there's something here we don't understand. We need to go back to that empathy stage and see if we can gather more information and insight. Misconceptions, one I mentioned earlier was that this is linear. It's again, it has to start somewhere, but it is iterative. A misconception that some people, if you begin to pull a design team together, people don't feel qualified. They said, well, I'm not a designer. And for the purposes of this work, we do need to utilize that term and believe that we have something of value to say. There is a lot of talking, but it's really grounded in action. And even small problems can benefit, even though large problems are often, design work really can help address very complex problems where a clear solution is not apparent. So why should we do this? I think I've talked a lot about this before, a little bit before I gave a little bit of idea about why this might be of value, but let's do another poll. I'd like you to think about how comfortable do you believe do most people feel about sharing their ideas at work? And it really doesn't have to be your work setting today. It could be in general, how do people talk about that? So I'm going to launch the next poll. Let's see if I can. I am having trouble launching the poll. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're going to launch this poll. Hopefully you can see this poll. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll here and then I'll share the results with you. Okay, I hope you can see the results right now. As you can see, we've got somewhat comfortable or even not comfortable. We do have a few people who said people are very comfortable sharing and they feel safe sharing their ideas openly, which is very encouraging. The reason I wanted to ask about this is a critical condition of design thinking where we really, in order for this to work well, people do have to feel safe to share. There's all kinds of reasons why people maybe don't share ideas. They maybe don't know where to share them, or don't feel safe sharing them, or they're not welcome to share ideas. But I would ask you to think a minute and to consider, what if we really could lean into this idea of creating a culture of innovation? What if we created safe spaces for people to share ideas? And if we wanted to do that, we know the research is clear on this. Trust and a sense of belonging are critical for that to happen. And I follow a really wonderful thought leader, Ronald Kahn, out of the Netherlands. And he just posted this, I think 2 days ago on LinkedIn. And as I was thinking about doing this with you today, this really stuck out for me. Those of you in the business sector, a lot of you probably have heard of this key performance indicator language. It's just important. It's just really an important idea. But he reframed it into people first language. And that really resonated with what I'm hoping to bring forward to you today, that's what design work needs to be situated within. And not just the users and stakeholders. Again, those are the participants we might be thinking about who we're trying to design for, but also the designers themselves, that they themselves really need to be at the forefront of this work so that they're informed, involved, interested, and inspired. And again, we want to get do we want first ideas, or do we want the best ideas or better ideas? And what design thinking really asks us to do is to sit back and make sure we're really solving the right problem, not a problem, not a problem that we can see immediately. And again, I go to good intent. People want to solve problems. Typically, they see something not working. They want to solve the problem. So there's often a call to action. But if we don't take the time to really empathize and understand what is happening, we can take action and it can feel good. It can feel, oh, yes, I've got this. I'm solving this problem. But in reality, we haven't really understood through somebody else's perspective. So that's really key to this process, and the benefits of it. It really can help catch missteps and mistakes early, and can save time and money. If beyond making something better for people, if you work in a nonprofit or a business, and that could be a really important perspective, that gosh, by taking a little bit of time to understand what's happening, and as we began to prototype, we caught something early rather than letting that move forward. Um, Jean Ledke, who's a leader in design thinking in the social sector, really emphasizes that design work in this collaborative space really helps us address our biases that can hamper innovation. It also really leans into the idea of belonging and buy-in. So this language about collaborators, designers coming to the space, have voice. If we can create a sense of trust and belonging, it can embrace creativity because people feel more open to share, and therefore becomes an inclusive practice. So this is an MRI machine. Some of you may not know that, but I'd like you to think a minute about how this might be experienced by a child. And I'm sure you can imagine that this would be quite scary for a lot of children to experience. And there's a designer, an industrial designer, Doug Dietz, who designed an MRI machine at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. And he was witnessing children coming into the space because he's somebody who helps with this work, as they looked at and it was quite terrifying. And he literally called this terrifying, terrific. He redesigned an MRI so that it became an adventurous space. And he did this by observing his users, the children, the patients. And he thought deeply about how he could empathize with them to do a better design. And I'm going to share with you a quick clip of this, just 2 minutes, so that you can hear him talking about this.
This is Jules, VP of a ketchup company, about to use Grammarly to handle a PR issue. And it's not relevant.
Skip ad.
I just asked.
There we go.
I'm the principal designer for global design. Hi, I'm Doug Dietz. I'm the principal designer for global design at GE Healthcare, and I'm the lead designer for Adventure Series. The Adventure Series is really an activity that we've been working on to see what can we do around our diagnostic imaging equipment to make it friendlier for both the family and for young patients. We have large diagnostic imaging equipment at GE Healthcare. They're huge, and some of them make noises. Adventure Series is really looking at it really from the child's perspective, looking at where their anxiety points are and coming up with some really nice solutions that help those, whether those are visually taking over the room in a theme, like a jungle theme or a pirate adventure or something, as well as music that leads them into the room and coloring books. So we wanted to have elements that addressed all the anxiety points.
My name's Liz Auer.
I'm Duncan Auer.
Where is this? Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh. Well, we're here today for a CT scan of Duncan's sinuses. He's had some really chronic congestion and coughing. So we're gonna have a look and see what's going on in there. And the pirate room was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. The room was painted completely like a pirate setup, including the floor. The floor was like the dock with the water on the sides, and animals and things on the walls. And the CT scanner itself was like the wheel of a pirate ship. It's for a child, it can be kind of scary. You see things that make noise and that's very institutional, and this is, you're not even really thinking about the fact that you're doing a procedure. Very, very welcoming, very whimsical and fun.
Distraction starts out with a few items to try to catch the child's attention. But you need more than that. You have to have the buy-in from the staff, the physicians, from the nurses, the technologists, and even the families, so that when they come here and they see what we've done and how we've decorated the rooms, they feel as if they really are on an adventure, and they feel when they're having their scan, there's no need to be panicked or afraid. So that when they get up out of the scan and they leave, they're walking out that door with a positive feeling.
We really.
Okay, so I just thought I would stop there with that video, and I'd like to think about how this is a large scale type of innovation. Clearly, it created a lot. It required a lot of resources, I'm sure, a lot of money and time and energy. But I think we could all. Here's something else that is from that article that comes from. They were able to reduce the need to sedate children, which was 80 to 90% of children need sedation to use an MRI. And I cannot tell you the exact number, but it was reduced significantly, which I would argue is a critical healthcare outcome for children. And it's a really good example of somebody, good intent. We need MRI machines, and somebody took the time to notice, to observe what children were experiencing, to feel their emotions, and to try to do this better. And I love at the end, I didn't play the whole 5 minutes, but you can hear that they really needed buy-in from everybody in that space, because they needed physicians to buy into it. They needed the medical team and staff to buy into it. So that's a really important part of this. And I had mentioned that earlier, how buy-in is an important part of that phase. Okay. So I just don't have time to show the whole video, and I'm wondering if you can see my screen, actually. I think something.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so we're going to share again. I think that's right. I stopped share. Oh gosh. Anybody else ever, there it is. Anybody else lose the navigation bar sometimes? Gosh, okay, let's see if I've got it. All right, here we go. How are we doing now? You see it okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. So again, they moved an MRI machine to this really beautiful adventure space. There's a little story in here too about how if the child laid still, and that's a really important part of this, somehow they were able to design fish jumping over them so that the child was encouraged to lay still. So I think it's just a really beautiful, heartwarming example. I'd like to talk a little bit about conditions. I've obviously mentioned these earlier, but again, reminding that this work is almost always collaborative. We want to create safe versus unsafe spaces for this work. We want to hold on to empathy and curiosity rather than, I know the way, I know the answer. And we want to stay very focused on our stakeholders and users. It's a really important part of this work. And I'm going to ask you to consider your positionality for a minute, because this is really important. If you're somebody who's trying to gather ideas for something new, if you are in a position where you are perceived as being a leader or having great influence, you could unintentionally stifle good ideas and creativity. And people who are in these positions sometimes are surprised they're in them, actually, and maybe they have good intent. They feel like, hey, I'm a welcoming person. They really have forgotten perhaps of how it feels that they are now in that position of power and what it feels to others in their space. So you can fix this, you can help address this, but this is really important. There are power dynamics in almost any organization. And if you're part of the team, you can also help by helping others on your team, even if you're not in the leadership position, encouraging them to share good ideas, leaning into positivity and support. So we all have a role in this, and but it's really important, I would say, for somebody who has some influence to really be mindful of that can actually stifle innovation. So I'd like you to think in your own mind of a design challenge you think you would like to solve, or it's something that's probably, we have them everywhere. Could be small, could be big. If you're just tired and it's lunch and I can't think of one more thing, you could grab one of mine. I was thinking, what if we designed a playground? What if you were on a community playground committee? You're going to design a new playground, or maybe you were asked to design a new team building activity for some organization or for work, or maybe you've been grappling with trying to build online community. You know, our remote workforce is expanding, and COVID really taught us about that idea. And so you can have a smaller or larger idea like you'd be thinking about. And here's another context I'd like you to be aware that we all have to have this. We all have limits on time. We all have limits on money. Even Google and Apple do not have infinite amounts of time or money. We have to often think about what's feasible and viable. But while these can be barriers, in many ways, they can support innovation, because sometimes constraints force us to think differently in new ways. So don't always look at that as, oh, I can't do this because these are sitting there in front of me. Make sure you're thinking about this: discovery first, solutions last. This is something really important to, if you're working with a group of people, it's so easy all the time in conversation to jump to the solution before we actually really understand what's going on. We can assume we know, but I want to emphasize that we have one worldview. We have our own lived experiences. We have our own ways of seeing and doing things. But these necessarily are not the ways other people, they aren't actually the other way people are experiencing things. And it's important to be reminded of that. And we all can try our best to empathize with what our user perspective is, knowing we can get closer, but we can actually truly never get there. It's a little frustrating to consider, but it's true. And again, trust and belonging. I keep saying that here, but it's really essential. So I want you to make sure that you're aware that it's really important, this idea of inclusion. Like, it's a really key cornerstone to foster creativity and new ideas. Okay, so here it is again. Again, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. Sometimes again, overlapping, linear. I just want to remind you of this again, what those are. One of the first steps you want to think about is, who are the stakeholders? Okay, so one thing you might want to do is do something called stakeholder mapping. This is really important to do with a team, because sometimes at first glance, you can easily identify stakeholders. You think, oh, yeah, there are these groups of people. But it's as you begin to write them down or work with a team, pretty soon you begin to consider other stakeholders you maybe hadn't considered. It's important to think about who has input, who has interest, who has influence, who might be affected. How do these stakeholders think and feel? And how do we honor and include different stakeholders? And we should always be thinking about, who are we missing? Who is not here? Who have we not considered? By doing this, you can get closer to solving better problems. And then we take that stakeholder group, we move into researching, seeking to understand. I would like to just emphasize the need for deep listening at times. We might want to observe what's happening. We might want to do something called empathy maps or journey maps, and have some quick examples that I can share with you. But you can easily find lots and lots of resources on these areas. And I have a handout that we'll hand out that Dr. Amy Merzen has, that she's going to share with you later about this stage in particular. So this might be an example of something you could do with a team. Consider some users, consider about perhaps there's a service that you're providing. So if we think back to the MRI machine, if we thought about that child in the middle of this, what would they be hearing? What would that child be seeing? What might they be thinking and feeling, saying and doing? What are the pain points of that? And what are opportunities? But I would argue another key stakeholder, and those of you, if you're a caregiver and you brought a child to that experience, you are also a key stakeholder. You certainly would be hearing things, seeing things, feeling and thinking things that are also important. And so with the medical staff. So again, that's an example of how you could take this and use this to consider small or larger problems. You could do something called journey mapping. There are so many ways to do a journey map. This is one example. This is something that I found from a company called Intratus. I don't know if I've said the name correctly. But this might be an example of trying to really slowly unpack what is that journey of somebody who's new to a company. So maybe they're signing that contract, maybe they get a welcome from the manager, maybe they're introduced to the values. But what's not on here, and you could add, is what are the high and low points as this person is journeying through this experience. Maybe when they sign the contract, that's incredibly exciting. That's a high point for them. Maybe when they meet the CEO, they feel a little nervous. So again, understanding the experience of that person, but also those feelings is important. I'm going to back up and offer this idea as well. You could have somebody who's just out, we think of our St. Scholastica grads, they're just getting ready for that first job and how this feels for them versus somebody who's mid-career, both getting hired at the same company. So even this could feel very different for different people, depending on where they are. Journey map could look something like this. A group of people could be in a room and you're brainstorming together. From there, we take those insights. You might have actually some other data, other information. You may not need all those empathy tools. You might need a couple. And what you're trying to do is get closer to what is the design challenge? What are we trying to do here? So at this phase, we're trying to define, we're trying to figure out the trends, where and what is the issue exactly? What can we begin to try to solve? One strategy here too might be what they call the 5 whys. like this is a problem, why? And it can be kind of an annoying strategy because you just keep trying to get at why. It's like my 4-year-old granddaughter, actually, right? Why? But what it can do is really help you get closer to that problem. From there, you're trying to identify pain points and opportunities that you can then move into. You might develop personas of different people. So having personas, and we use this in a curriculum design. This was our design challenge, designing our Doctorate of Ed leadership for folks who are not just in education. We were trying to think about how do we design and welcome people from other organizations? Like, what if somebody came from healthcare? What if somebody came from a nonprofit organization? How can we design with those different types of people in mind? They are often fictional characters. They represent your user and stakeholders. They're really helpful in helping you keep them in mind. We had them in a room. We had our personas right around the walls, taped on the wall. We named them. They were very real to us. And as we began to prototype, we kept saying to ourselves, wait a minute, would this idea really meet the needs of this person? No, it wouldn't. And then we'd go back. So this is a really effective technique that could be helpful to you. What insights do you already have? Think about how might we do this? How could we do this? So then we're moving into ideations, which is often called brainstorming. Some quick tools there. Again, essential to have a sense of safety in your space. You could do activities like everybody sits together individually and tries to write down how they think and how an idea they have, then come together in a group and share. This is actually really effective where we have somebody in the space who has a lot of influence and power. They might need to be in that space because they are an essential stakeholder. But if you can do individual work and people don't have their name on an idea, maybe you're doing this on sticky or you're doing it digitally. What happens there is the other users are not unnecessarily influenced by that person who's in a leadership position. That's a really effective technique then to do things anonymously, individually, and then come to group. You can try to do something called a 100 idea challenge. You can also embody yes and language rather than yes, but. We all know, like, sometimes, well, that's a good idea, Amy, but have you thought about this? And there are times when you do need to decide certain problems are not going to work. But what I would encourage you to do is set that aside for a while you're in this phase. Try to stay open, try to go back to ideas, and then consider this. try to design from another perspective. So for example, what if we looked at a playground and thought, what if we were Disney and we were designing the playground? We're on the playground committee. Or what if we were Starbucks and we were designing a playground? What that does is it really gets you out of your own head and helps you think of a different way of a different idea, a different way of looking at something. So I'm going to take the playground idea here and we'll just practice a little bit here together. And you can just in your own mind or jot down some ideas. So if we were to think about who our users are, if we were thinking about the stakeholders, at first glance, obviously they're children, but perhaps we haven't identified the ages of children, young children versus older children. Who are the caregivers? I take children to playgrounds a lot right now, and what I care about is that there's a fence. I want a fence around the playground. I'm surrounded by playgrounds in my area, and my users, my grandchildren, often want to go to the certain playground because it's been designed, I think, a little bit better with them in mind. They have more fun there. This at first glance maybe doesn't seem like a really important idea, but I think the ideas behind it support design thinking and can be transferred to any setting. We always then move from empathy, define, ideate, we're moving to action into prototyping. So this could be, we're going to sketch out an idea. Maybe we create a physical creation out of, I've seen people do this recently at a workshop I was in, and everybody was given a little kit with paper and Legos and clay, and they what was really interesting at first, I thought, how is this going to work? But with a team, we had to talk through what each of these physical pieces represented. And it actually, it challenged me because I realized I hadn't thought it was going to work. And it was actually really interesting, and it was fun. And it forced us to talk differently than I had thought was possible. So again, keeping our users in mind is paramount, even as part of this prototyping. So I talked about journey mapping a bit, and sometimes it's hard if you're not creating a physical product to think about what does a prototype look like. But this is where a journey mapping activity might be really helpful. So again, you could create a prototype. You could test it with a few users. So you could really identify what are the moments that really matter. What can we identify as touch points? And what is happening at those touch points that where we might want to consider a different approach? And how can we try something else and get some feedback? What's working, what's not working, and what can we do to improve it? So this is that iterative process that I talked about. An example here too might be, maybe we're going to maybe I run a small business and I want to figure out a customer experience of some kind, or I need to create a team a team building activity or an onboarding experience, a service that I want to provide to my employees. So this can be really helpful as a prototype if you have it written out and then you actually implement part of it and have people try something. It moves beyond the paper into action and you try it out. At this point, you're testing that prototype. Again, you can see the overlap. You could call it a pilot. You could try one piece of it and learn from that, then expand, get some feedback, and then ask yourself, do we need more information? Are we really addressing the needs of our user? Do we need to go back and get a little more information? So that would be an example of, again, moving through those phases. I really, really think that even if you can't use the whole process, if you can try some pieces of this, always trying to keep those users in mind, this is really a beautiful opportunity. It really can support inclusive collaboration and belonging from your team itself. It can support creativity, which supports better new ideas and innovation, and really keeps people first and can really solve problems for people. That's what makes me so excited about this process. And I know at first, again, these phases can seem very overwhelming, but I would say just what's a small place you could start? What do you think you could do better today? What's a small place you could start to try one of these ideas? And maybe leave here today trying something out. Let's try this other quiz. We'll try one more poll here. And I'm just curious, what phase do you think is most important to support innovation? What do you think? It's really interesting to see how this is coming out. I'm going to, I'll end the poll in 5 seconds here. We'll share the results. Okay. And we'll share the results. I'm going to make sure you can see. So most people here today believe that empathy and research is really critical for supporting innovation. And then we have somebody who's chosen all of these phases, and they really are all important. Thank you for doing that. That's interesting. I'm going to just briefly mention this concept of inclusion. This is a preferred definition that comes from St. Scholastica's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion preferred definitions. This is on our college's website. We have an initiative around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I underline the words that I think are important here, that inclusion is active and it is intentional and ongoing, and that this can lead to empathetic understanding. So these ideas really do have good synergy and they go together. And before we move to questions, I have something for you. I developed what I'm calling the empathy toolkit. I just pulled together some tools that I think that we've talked about today that might be helpful for you if you're interested in trying something out. And I have Dr. Merzen's going to put that in the chat. So it's a document you can take with you. If you're listening to this on a recorded version, it'll be included in a message for you. But while that's happening, maybe you'd be willing to even just reflect or put in the chat, is there an action or strategy you could bring back to your setting? Maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're working in a leadership capacity, or you're part of a team, or maybe this is something you see that could be done in another place where you are trying to improve a situation. And what new ideas might you have? And if you'd like, you could, I hope you'll reflect right now on something. What is the one thing you could do? I think sometimes when we go to a webinar or learn something new, if it feels overwhelming, I don't want to assume that it does for you today, but if it does, what's this one little idea that you could take with you? If you'd like to share that in the chat, that'd be great. It's okay if you don't. And these are lots of different ways you can connect with me. I'm on, there's my email. If you have any questions, you want to connect, I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you there. And Twitter's like my networking. And then I have an Instagram page I've started where I'm talking about design work called Design for Joy. So you feel free to, I'm not Joy, I'm Chery, but I think design work's joyful. So you can come hang out there if you'd like to follow along. And thank you so much. I'm gonna just stop it there for some conversation and coffee. Or coffee, I must be needing coffee. Conversation and questions. I'm wondering if we have any. I'm just so, and you can put them in the chat too. And I'm just so honored that you all took time out of your day to be here. I know how busy so many of you are. I see some faces I recognize. So
It looks like there is a comment in the chat. We have a new Designing Successful New Products course, and use a model that was shared here, strategizer.com.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for that, Cher.
Yeah.
Oh, and the book value proposition design.
Okay.
So
Oh,
there's
I
an
hope it was
application.
helpful for you. You'll be able to get a copy of the recording. So if you, great question. There's a question about designing for theoretical things. I think that's such a good question. And I would say, so when you ask about theoretical things, I'm sitting with that for a minute because I'm thinking a lot of times that gets at what's ambiguous. It can feel, we've used design process, for example, for our program. And so those are experiences that students have. They're grappling with theory. There were different ways in which we were asking students to do that. I am very sorry, but I don't know that I am getting at an answer for you. I would say, to begin with, is this a human-centered approach? Is it something that because design work starts with the very foundation of the work is to think about, if we're implementing all the phases, if we're thinking about how are we using this to create a better experience for people. That's not to say that some of those other phases couldn't be used to help think about and ideate and be creative around other ideas. So it's a really good question. I don't know that I totally answered it, and please email me if you would like to explore that further.
And I'm wondering, I don't know if this applies to the question, but
Mm-hmm.
so your application to the design thinking, so you were showing us the physical pieces, like the playground, like the MRI machine. But in your work then, where are you applying that design thinking process? So you talked about curriculum a little bit, but maybe.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm
more?
really happy you called that out. I'll expand that out. So when we started doing curriculum work, for those folks who teach at any level, often what a person is doing is creating an instructional experience of some kind for students. And often this is almost always done in a siloed approach. This has historically been the way it's been. Faculty often do this alone, and so do K-12 educators often. And so one of the ways in which we tried to break that, what we're calling a legacy practice, is we started together by thinking about, first of all, keeping all those different users in mind. Who are the people we're designing this for? And then we partnered up to try to imagine, first of all, what was it that we wanted everybody to leave our program with? What are the skills, the dispositions, that would be helpful for them? And then we tried to think about how might we design a series of classes. And then we went to this, what I would call a micro level, and we partnered up and created prototypes out of a 1 to 2 page prototype of what we might do in a class. Then we brought it back to the group and we got stakeholder feedback. We also had an advisory council who weighed in on this prototype. And what really became apparent is that our program is designed to infuse equity and social justice. And it was very clear that a lot of us were not, in fact, designing in ways that were truly equitable, that really embodied, at first glance, we thought we were, but our program is so much, I would say, Amy, and you're part of our program, stronger in that way because we got other perspectives from other stakeholders, and they would say things like, I don't know if you should be doing this. Here's a better way to do it. Have you thought of this? And then we went back and prototyped again, and we brought it forward again. And through that process, and I hope I'm explaining this enough so that people can grasp it, that was that design process where we thought about our users. We tried to define our challenge. And we even that program challenge for us was not just what instructional activities our students were experiencing, but also the format. We were doing this online. Well, how can we do this in a way to meet the needs of our learners? we felt strongly we needed a live seminar component. That doesn't always work for every user. We debated that at length. So we debated, we talked, we looked at research, we thought of our stakeholders, and we're still doing that. So that is not, I would argue, a physical product necessarily. I would say it better aligns with a service. What do you think I missed, Amy, on that one?
I think just even circling back to that idea that it's not linear, right? Because we are still,
Mhm.
like you said, we're still revisiting. We're still, you know,
Yeah,
we're looking forward and we're looking back, right? So just the whole, it doesn't stop just because we're done. We're not technically done. We're still
yeah.
in that process.
I love that you said that. We're looking forward, we're looking back. We're trying to gather key stakeholder feedback, which today is our students who we care about deeply. We want them to have a good experience. But I would say, again, this could be transferred to any group of people in any setting. So I am actually mentoring many doctoral students who are not working in higher ed, who are also providing a service of some kind to a group of people. And we have, for example, we have some students working in nonprofits, working in after school clubs. We have some students working in a healthcare setting, trying to close rural healthcare disparities. So even in those cases, those are a bit more around service design. How can I do this better? What are we missing? What do the users say? Why aren't they coming in for their annual mammogram? What's happening to stop them? So that's an example of a problem with students grappling with right now. So what could be designed in a way to help improve that situation? We're 2 minutes to 1. I bet we have to, it was just, again, I'm so honored you were here with me today. Thank you. I really hope you got something out of the hour today.